Welcome back, everyone, to Stock Explorers. I'm really excited for this deep dive. We're going to be talking all about Lexicon Pharmaceuticals and some big news they just had, a major development that we're going to break down. And, we're going to make it really clear what it all means, especially if you're thinking about investing
Absolutely.
in Lexicon. So to start things off, I think the best place to begin is with that huge deal they just inked with Novo Nordisk. We're talking $1 billion.
Yeah, $1 billion licensing agreement. That's definitely a headline grabber.
It really is.
And it's all centered around this drug they're developing called LX9851. Have you had a chance to look into that at all?
Oh, yeah. I did some digging into LX9851. It's designed to tackle obesity and those metabolic issues that often come along with it. But what's really interesting is that it's not like the usual drugs out there.
Right. It's not a GLP-1 agonist, which is what we're seeing a lot of these days.
Yeah.
This one's an oral non-incretin.
Yeah.
So totally different approach.
Different mechanism.
Different mechanism, yeah.
So, I mean, $1 billion, that's got to be significant for Lexicon, right? What kind of immediate impact does that have on them financially?
Well, just to start, Lexicon is set to receive something like $75 million in upfront payments and then like near-term milestones. Yeah. And the crazy thing is that initial amount is actually a huge chunk of their market value.
Really?
At the time that the deal was announced, it was like about 63%, which basically means...
That's huge.
Yeah, it's huge. It means that this deal immediately de-risks their financial outlook.
I see.
It makes them potentially a much more attractive company to invest in.
Okay, that makes sense. So from an investor standpoint, that upfront cash is a big plus.
For sure.
But then you mentioned there's also potential for even more money down the line.
Right. So beyond that initial $75 million,
right,
there's the potential for Lexicon to rake in up to $1 billion.
$1 billion.
In total milestone payments.
Yeah.
But, and this is important, those payments are tied to like specific achievements that Novo Nordisk has to hit. Like, getting the drug through development, regulatory approvals, and then ultimately...
actually selling it.
Yeah, how well it actually does in the market.
Right.
So it's not a guaranteed billion.
Right.
It's very much tied to the drug's success.
Okay, so it's kind of like performance-based bonuses, right? If Novo Nordisk does well, then Lexicon benefits even more.
Exactly. It's an incentive for both companies to really make this drug a winner.
Got it. So that's a pretty sweet deal. But there's also the royalty piece of this puzzle.
Yeah, got it. So on top of those milestone payments, Lexicon will also be getting tiered royalties.
Tiered?
Yeah, tiered royalties on the net sales of the drug. So basically, as LX9851 starts selling, Lexicon gets a cut. And the more the drug sells, the higher their percentage of the revenue becomes. Like just as an example, they might start out with a 5% royalty on the first billion in sales, and then that could jump up to 8%. Or even more, if it really takes off.
Yeah.
So it's a long-term revenue stream that's directly tied to the drug's success.
So potentially a pretty significant long-term revenue stream.
Absolutely. And it gives Lexicon a really nice financial cushion while they focus on what they do best.
Speaking of that, how does this partnership change things for Lexicon operationally? What are they actually going to be doing now that Novo Nordisk is in the picture?
Well, it seems like they're going to be focusing on the early stages of drug development. Specifically, they're responsible for getting everything ready for the IND application. So, that's all the preclinical studies, safety testing, manufacturing processes, that kind of stuff. Basically laying the groundwork for the drug's development.
So really leveraging their core expertise right now.
Exactly. They're playing to their strengths.
And while Lexicon's busy with that, what's Novo Nordisk handling?
So once Lexicon gets those IND-enabling activities done, Novo Nordisk takes the reins. They're going to be in charge of global development, manufacturing, and then the big one, commercialization. Basically, they're taking it from the lab to the global market. And that's where their experience in these,
in those
markets
huge.
Really comes into play. They've got a massive infrastructure for diabetes and obesity drugs, so they're really well positioned to make this drug a success. And, the obesity market, that's a big deal these days. It's a growing global concern, and there's a huge demand for effective treatment options.
Yeah, you're telling me. I feel like I see a new weight loss drug advertised every time I turn on the TV. So how does LX9851 fit into all that? What makes it stand out from the crowd?
Well, like we said earlier, it's a first-in-class oral non-incretin, and it works in a completely different way than those GLP-1 agonists that are everywhere right now. This one targets an enzyme called ACSL5.
ACSL5.
Yeah, which is, it's a whole new approach.
I was reading about that, and there was something about how LX9851 could potentially be used with semaglutide, which is one of Novo Nordisk's existing drugs.
Right, and that's really interesting for investors. From what we've seen in preclinical studies, there's a chance that LX9851 could actually make semaglutide even more effective at helping people lose weight.
Really?
Yeah, and there's even some indication that it might help prevent weight regain.
That would be huge.
Huge.
Yeah.
After someone stops taking a GLP-1.
Yeah.
So you can imagine the potential there. You've got this blockbuster drug, semaglutide.
Right.
And then you add LX9851 to the mix, and suddenly you've got a whole new level of effectiveness. That's really exciting.
That's really interesting. So it's not just a standalone treatment. It could be a way to enhance existing therapies. I think this whole deal really speaks to the strength of Lexicon's drug discovery platform. It's like a stamp of approval from one of the biggest players in the game.
Absolutely. I mean, this agreement is a major validation of Lexicon's research capabilities, specifically their Genome 5000 program. They discovered LX9851, developed it through those early stages, and now Novo Nordisk, a global leader, is betting big on it. So that really bolsters Lexicon's credibility.
Yeah.
And I think it could make them even more attractive for future partnerships.
And it sounds like they're not wasting any time. I mean, they're already working on those IND-enabling activities, and they're aiming to submit the application in 2025.
They're moving full speed ahead.
Yeah.
And, I mean, you have to imagine that the preclinical data they presented to Novo Nordisk must have been pretty compelling to warrant a billion-dollar deal.
Yeah.
So what we saw from those studies was really promising. We saw significant weight loss, reduced food intake, less fat mass, and all this was in combination with semaglutide in preclinical models. They also showed that LX9851 could potentially help reduce weight regain and have positive effects on liver steatosis after stopping semaglutide. And there's even some evidence to suggest that LX9851 might be able to activate the ileal brake.
The ileal brake.
Yeah, it's this physiological mechanism that basically slows down how fast food moves through your gut and makes you feel fuller sooner.
Oh, interesting.
So if they can activate that...
So you're not as hungry?
You're not as hungry. It's a natural way to help people eat less.
Right.
And potentially lose weight. So it's a really interesting aspect of the drug's potential.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about LX9851, which is clearly a big deal for Lexicon. But they've got other things cooking too, right? What's the latest with pilavapadin?
Yeah, pilavapadin or LX9201. That's their drug for neuropathic pain.
Right.
And they just had some positive news come out from their phase 2b progress study.
Okay.
Which was looking at the drug in people with diabetic peripheral neuropathic pain. So basically nerve pain. That's a complication of diabetes.
Got it.
And the big takeaway from the study was that the 10 milligram dose was shown to significantly reduce pain.
Good.
And it had good safety profile, which is always important.
Yeah, especially when we're talking about pain medications. I mean, you don't want to trade one problem for another.
Exactly. Side effects can be a real deal breaker for a lot of these drugs, so seeing good tolerability is definitely encouraging.
Okay, so based on those positive phase 2b results, what's the plan for pilavapadin going forward?
Well, Lexicon is planning to move that 10 milligram dose into phase 3 trials in 2025.
Next year.
Yeah, next year. They're aiming to start trials both in the U.S. and internationally, and they're currently talking to the FDA to finalize the design of those phase 3 studies.
So full steam ahead with pilavapadin. What's particularly interesting to me about this drug is its potential as a non-opioid treatment. We all know the opioid crisis that we've been dealing with.
So having new options that don't carry those same risks is a big deal. It's a huge unmet need. So pilavapadin, it works by blocking an enzyme called adaptor-associated kinase 1, or AAK1. And this is like a brand new target for pain relief. The thinking is that if you inhibit AK1, you can reduce pain without messing with the opioid pathways in the brain.
So it's like a completely different pathway to managing pain.
Exactly. It's a different mechanism altogether, which is really exciting. Now, in the progress study, they saw an average pain reduction of about 1.74 points on this pain scale with the 10 milligram dose compared to like a 1.31 reduction with the placebo. And you might think, well, that's not a huge difference. But when you're dealing with chronic pain, even a small improvement can make a big difference in someone's quality of life.
Absolutely. And I'm sure for people who are living with chronic pain, any relief is welcome.
Absolutely.
Right. And you also mentioned that they improved the tolerability of the drug. How did they do that?
So in a previous study, they used a loading dose, which basically means you take a higher dose initially to get the drug into your system quicker. But it turned out that caused some tolerability issues for some people.
Okay.
So in the progress study, they got rid of the loading dose, and it seems to have made a difference. People tolerated the drug better.
I see.
Yeah, it's a good example of how they're constantly refining
Yeah.
and improving.
Yeah, so it sounds like they're really homing in on the optimal way to administer this drug. So pilavapadin has the potential to be the first new oral non-opioid pain reliever in over 2 decades. That's got to be a big deal, right?
It is a big deal, and the market for these types of drugs is massive. I mean, we're talking billions of dollars.
Wow.
And there's a desperate need for safer and more effective treatments. So if pilavapadin makes it through the trials and gets approved, it could be a game changer.
Okay, so we've got LX9851 for obesity, pilavapin for neuropathic pain, and I know there's another drug in their pipeline that's being looked at for hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, or HCM, right?
Sure, they're looking at sotagliflozin for HCM.
Sotagliflozin, that's the same drug they're already selling as Inpefa for heart failure, right?
This one, but now they're exploring its potential in a whole new area.
Okay, and what's the latest on that front?
So they're currently running a phase 3 trial called Sonata HCM, and they're actively recruiting patients. The trial is designed to evaluate how safe and effective sotagliflozin is for adults with symptomatic HCM, and they're including both obstructive and non-obstructive types of HCM, which is important.
Yeah, why is that important?
Well, a lot of studies in HCM focus on just one of those subtypes.
Okay.
But including both in this trial means that if the results are good, sotagliflozin could potentially be approved for a wider range of patients.
I see. So they're casting a wider net.
Exactly. And that makes sense considering that over 1 million people in the U.S. alone are estimated to have HCM. So the market opportunity is definitely there.
Right. So it's another area with a large unmet need. For those who may not be familiar with HCM, can you tell us a little bit more about the condition and why it's such a problem?
So HCM is a heart condition where the heart muscle becomes abnormally thick, which can make it harder for the heart to pump blood effectively. It can cause a whole host of problems like shortness of breath, fatigue, chest pain, and even fainting. And unfortunately, there aren't a lot of great treatment options available right now.
So having a new potential therapy could be significant.
It could be huge for these patients.
And how does sotagliflozin work in the context of HCM? I know it's an SGLT12 inhibitor.
Right, so gliflozin basically blocks these two proteins, SGLT2 and SGLT1,
Okay.
which are involved in how your body regulates glucose. Now, SGLT2 inhibitors on their own are already known to be beneficial in heart failure.
Right.
And this trial is looking specifically at how that dual inhibition of both SGLT1 and SGLT2 might impact HCM. And the fact that sotagliflozin is already approved for heart failure as Inpefa gives them a head start because they already have a lot of safety data on the drug.
That's got to be helpful.
It is. It can really streamline the approval process for this new indication.
Right. It kind of takes away some of the guesswork. So it seems like Lexicon is really laser focused on these areas where there's a clear need for new and better treatment options.
Yeah, their whole lead to succeed strategy is all about that. It's about developing innovative therapies for conditions where there's a high unmet need and then partnering up with other companies to really maximize their impact. And I think the Novo Nordisk deal is a perfect example of that.
It really does seem to fit perfectly with their overall game plan. Let's shift gears for a second and talk about Lexicon's financials. I had a look at their recent quarterly and full-year reports for 2024, and I noticed a big jump in revenue in the fourth quarter, but they also had increased R&D spending, and they reported a net loss for the year. Can you help us unpack those numbers a bit?
Sure. So that revenue jump in Q4 was mainly due to the upfront payment they got from the Viatris licensing agreement for Inpefa. So that's the deal.
Right.
Where Viatris is going to be selling sotagliflozin for heart failure outside of the U.S. and Europe.
Right.
And that upfront cash is a big boost to their bottom line. But then you also see the increased R&D spending, which is totally expected. They're putting a lot of money into developing those drugs we talked about, pilavapadin and sotagliflozin, to get them through those clinical trials. And that investment is going to eat into their profits for now.
Makes sense.
But it's important to remember that they're spending that money strategically. These are potentially blockbuster drugs.
Right.
And if they succeed, those investments are going to pay off big time down the road.
Okay, so while a net loss might not sound great on the surface, it's not necessarily a bad thing.
Not at all. You have to look at what they're spending the money on and what the potential returns are.
So it's all about the long game.
Yeah, absolutely. They're playing the long game here. And they also recently announced a big restructuring plan, right? They're shutting down their commercial operations and going all in on R&D.
That was a big announcement. What's the thinking behind that move?
Well, it's a bold move for sure, but it makes sense strategically. They're basically streamlining the company, cutting costs, and focusing all their energy and resources on what they do best: drug discovery and development.
It seems like a really smart way to maximize their efficiency.
Right. They're doubling down on their strength.
Exactly. And I also noticed their quick ratio is looking pretty healthy, which suggests they're in a good position financially.
Yeah, their quick ratio is solid, which means they have plenty of liquid assets to cover their short-term liabilities.
That's always a good sign.
Always a good sign. And they've also said they're actively looking for more strategic partnerships, which is in line with their lead to succeed approach. So they're not just relying on their internal resources, they're looking for opportunities to collaborate and leverage the expertise of other companies.
So they're open to working with others to advance their pipeline and reach new markets.
Exactly. And when you think about their future, they're really well positioned in those key areas we've been talking about: neuropathic pain, cardiometabolic disorders, obesity through the Novo Nordisk collaboration. And then they've also got some exciting early-stage programs in the works. So there's a lot to be optimistic about if you're looking at Lexicon from an investment perspective.
Okay, so just to recap for our listeners, Lexicon has this major partnership with Novo Nordisk for a potential blockbuster obesity drug. They're making great strides with pilavapadin, a non-opioid treatment for neuropathic pain, and they're exploring sotagliflozin as a new treatment for HCM, another area with a big unmet need.
Yeah, they've got a lot going on.
It seems like they're firing on all cylinders.
Yeah.
And the financials are looking good, too. They've got cash on hand, they're streamlining their operations to focus on R&D, and they're actively seeking new partnerships.
They're definitely a company to watch.
This has been a fascinating deep dive into Lexicon Pharmaceuticals. Thanks for walking us through all of this.
No problem. Always happy to talk about exciting companies like Lexicon.
For our listeners out there, if you found this deep dive helpful and want to keep exploring the world of stocks with us, make sure to subscribe to the show and turn on those notifications so you don't miss any of our future deep dives.
And as you continue to research Lexicon, I'd encourage you to think about the long-term potential of their Genome 5000 platform. I mean, this technology gives them a unique window into the human genome.
Right.
And with the way medicine is moving towards personalized therapies and gene-based treatments, Lexicon is in a great position to potentially make some groundbreaking discoveries in the future. So it's not just about the drugs they have in development now, it's about what they might discover.
Right, so that platform could be the key to unlocking even more potential down the line.
Exactly. It's definitely something to keep an eye on.
Food for thought for sure. Thanks again, and we'll see you in our next deep dive.